Hey folks, a highly informative short interview today. I caught up with tech CEO Anders Murman, and we're going to go through ketosis, the benefits, fasting, Aspire study showing the true root cause of heart disease, and so much more. And we're also going to feature a fantastic new piece of technology. I've had it for the past week. I'm in love with it. I'll be upfront about that. And also, there's links below if you want to explore further this great technology. But anyway, with that, let's get into it. So, delighted to meet you, Anders, again, virtually.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here on your podcast.
Oh, not at all. Well, I'm a techie, and we had a long discussion a week or two ago, and it was intended being around 30 or 40 minutes max, and we ended up going well over an hour. And the reason is I'm fascinated by this technology. I've been disappointed with prior manifestations of acetone breath meters, and we can talk about the ketone technology, but this one has a killer punch. Probably many, but the one that's huge is the high cost pressure measuring onboard component, which I was stunned actually at the cost of it. And we don't need to mention the actual cost, but I'm involved in microelectronics for a couple of decades, and it's a huge adder, but it changes the game completely. So maybe we'll start just with your background and some of the technology that's come into this incredible device, and why it's been done so well.
Oh, yeah, sure. So my name is Anders Murman. I'm a Swedish 55-year-old. I live in Uppsala, north of Stockholm. I will lived also 2 years in California for a short while, but all the other time I've been in Sweden. And I worked all my life. I'm a civil engineer. I have a Master of Science in Engineering Physics with focus on particle physics and computer algorithms. And I worked all my life in medical technology, in medtech, and primarily 21st year in radiation therapy of cancer, specialized medicine basically, and working trying to move the needle on treatment for certain solid tumor cancers. I had nothing over those 24 years about the importance of food and nutrition and metabolism connected to cancer. Strikingly, I ended in that business at 2013. And then I moved over, actually, I headhunted to a company called Aerocrine. We were building breathalyzers to detect the degree of inflammatory asthma in your bronchial tree. And we detected in parts per billion nitric oxide. And there I learned, I got into, learning about Internet of Things, learning about breath analysis and breath sampling. And the most important thing, and I alluding to what you just mentioned in the beginning, what I learned there is the most important thing when you're going to pick a molecule from your breath is not, that's the second most important thing, but it's not how good sensor you have for that type of molecule. That's also important. But the first degree of importance is how you sample from your lungs and how you sample your breath, and that you make sure that you sample from the same part of the lung every time. And in that case, you had to sample from the bronchial tree, and that was one certain procedure. In our case, when we want to detect acetone in your breath, you want to sample from the bottom of your lungs in the same manner every time. And that's to just answer and finish off my talk here. Intro talk is that's what I brought into this. When I started Diversify, or I am a co-founder of Diversify 6 years ago, our first product and the main product we're still selling right now are Acetrack. I brought, of course, all my experiences into that.
Excellent summary, Anders, and absolutely the pressure measurement, the breath measurement. I mean, I just know from my many decades involved in all branches of technology the fundamental importance of that in this arena. And it was stunning for me when I used the device first. It was actually in Keto Live. I met, I think, Lena.
All right, that's
Yeah,
our chairwoman of the board. Yeah.
absolutely, a lovely lady. And we were sitting outside the sun up in Burgoon in Switzerland. And I was talking to a lot of people, and there was a huge amount of activity. But I went outside because this did sound interesting. And then, very quickly, within a few sentences, she had me captivated because she immediately brought up the difference with this technology. And I immediately knew that that was a game changer. So I went ahead and tested it. And I since have had the device now for a few days. I've been testing. And it really is superb. As you breathe in, you have to get to a certain level. And I'll show this on the screen afterwards in editing. I'll show it on the screen. But you have to get to a certain level, and then you just watch your phone and change your breath quite easily, because you're visually looking at a green line between two error bars. So you're dynamically able to stay between the lines. And of course, the machine knows the pressure at every moment and how much air is coming and what's going on through your characterization algorithm. So the machine gets a very precise set of data and can correct for any ups and downs, and bang, you've got your acetone. And the reproducibility is extraordinary.
Yeah, exactly, because that's also the key. What I brought into starting to build this product, I started to look at ketosis at 2015. I had never heard the word, even though I worked in medical my life. So that says something. Anyway, so I started looking at it. I looked at the existing devices at the time, was really just ketonics at the time, I think, 8 years ago, maybe, at least what I could get hold of in Sweden. And I immediately realized, wow, this has to be done in a completely other manner in terms of how you sample from your breath. So so I started looking at various aspects of it, and the funny thing is, now 8 years later, we are still the only commercially available for private persons kind of breathalyzers, including alcohol breathalyzers, that has a pressure sensor built in. No one has that. And that's strange. It's not that expensive and it's not that hard. No one has, except the company I worked for before within asthma, and that's a primary care product and a special medicine product, and costs $3,000. No one has built in that and have this visual feedback on your phone to see that you actually are exhaling in the same manner every time. I'm surprised that at least not alcohol breathalyzers would have that. I worked with those two. I do think I know all the breathalyzers that exist on the world right now, and none of them have it. So I can only, thank for that. I think we are on the right track. I think that this is the only path you can go forward. And when we invested in building that and building support for all different types of phones, iOS, Android, and everything, we have built a platform for breath analysis of any molecule that you can breathe out. And bear with me, the only thing that goes through the blood gas barrier at the bottom of the alveoli are up to 4 carbon carbon atoms. So C4 and above C4, it's not breathed out. You have to capture it other way. So you can do it, by droplets and all things like that. I come back to that, but going back to the answer. I'm happy that we have invested in this platform, and we're going to detect more molecules in breath now that we have it.
Absolutely, and we won't branch into it immediately, but the measurement of hydrogen for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and gut microbiome issues, I think it's a massive area. I'm getting into it now, but as you say, the measurement of the molecules is actually a basic enough technology at this stage. It's fascinating that no one has put in the sensor, because again, not to keep going on about my background, but we used to shave off fractions of a cent in components in microelectronics because we're in a consumer industry and it's very fraught or competitive. So I'm well used to that. But equally, we knew the value of certain components that changed the game for our devices, and we would pay whatever it took. But it looks like the industry perhaps just has a perception that they can get away with a much weaker kind of outcome by saving the money on that sensor. I guess they haven't cottoned on, or they just think, look, the consumer maybe isn't aware of how important that is, so why should we put in the cost? I mean, what do you think?
I do think that is because most of the competitors, or all the ones that are detecting acetone or similar things, that are not that many on the world market right now, it's maybe 3, 4, or 5 competitors. None of them, they are all one product companies. They're not really invented by engineers in that sense, or coming in with a physics perspective like we have. They're more enthusiast, or a doctor or someone else. There's no problem with that, but they are not like you and me, worked with electronics and worked with how you would solve the problem. They just want to get a device out, maybe. And then on the alcohol breather side, I think it's just a competition. I think they have enough accuracy, they think, and then I don't really have a good answer to why you wouldn't want to improve the device. Many of the devices that we have also come up only in one version, and that's it. You build one hardware and sell it, and I hope things will fly. In business, that's not how it works. You need to have a plan, you need to have a roadmap, and many of them don't, because they're small companies and struggling with just getting the first product out, selling, etc. We have a much longer plan, and that we can harvest our investments in a more long-term future with the type of owners we have. But we founded the company we founded a company for many reasons, but one of the reasons was that I was disappointed at consumer health. I was disappointed at, back in 2016, what could you measure if you were not a diabetic, which had maybe a CGM or a blood glucose connected to your chronic diseases? It was nothing. It was a bathroom scale. And blood pressure, maybe with a Bluetooth connection. That was it. And then you can count steps, because you can count steps because it's easy to count steps. You can take pulse because it's easy to take pulse. And many of the big players, the big tech companies and the medtech companies, they measure things because they're easy to measure, not because they're relevant. So counting steps, it's great for a while, but after a while it doesn't say you anything. I have to say, while an acetone value really, and we should go into that, of course, that really tells you if you have started to produce energy in your liver in ketosis, and when and how much. And that's that is a new type of biomarker, a non-invasive biomarker that we are the first one to really detect in a repetitive and accurate way.
Yep, that's it. And I've done more R&Rs, and that's not taking it easy, guys, if you don't know the term. Reproducibility and repeatability. So tests you do with multiple parts over different time frames, rapid retesting, and also between different days, and you find out the full ability of a measurement device. And I noticed when I used early meters, actually, Anders, that I just instinctively knew, and I blew harder and slower and saw the numbers go everywhere, and I just knew this thing is crazy open to a very poor R&R. And I've already described how your device then completely negates that. It forces you down a funnel, and it just locks in the proper values. So let's go to ketosis. And again, for the listeners, it's not all about magic keto and magic weight loss and even magic cancer mitigation. All of that is true, but without the magic piece. But for me, I'm just going to quote, and I'll put a link to the study afterwards, one I found many years ago, and it just hit the spot for me. And it was a large team who are looking at beta-hydroxybutyrate, the ketone body, but of course you'll get acetone too, and acetone is the one to measure. But beta-hydroxybutyrate, they did an investigation with a large team, and they said, okay, we know that there are benefits to exercise, neurological benefits, but we want to know what the real mechanism is. And it was just beautiful. And they worked through a large kind of investigation, mechanistic science. And what they came up with basically is exercise benefits the brain primarily or substantially by the release of beta-hydroxybutyrate, in other words, ketone body. And they went through the mechanisms with BDNF, or brain-derived neuropathic factor, and all the science. And then they basically said that's the big mechanism. So that's the benefit of exercise. Ketone bodies, because that reflects a physiology that's releasing ketones, and also the ketones are actually beneficial directly. So it's beautiful. And I began to tell people at the time, you can get the benefits of exercise largely by doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Fasting.
Interesting.
You fast and you generate the beneficial molecules that they're now attributing to the benefits of exercise. So I just wanted to say that one so people know it's not all about stuffing butter sticks in your mouth. Myself and Dr. Gerber, my colleague and co-author, have always told people, if you want to go keto, just do healthy, low-carb, ancestral diet, low-carb, healthy fats. And if you want to go harder keto, just skip meals. Do less to get to keto. Don't push in fats. That doesn't make sense. So anyway, that's my little intro to the benefit of ketosis, and we'll go from there.
Ivor, I completely agree on you. That's exactly what I do. And since I started this, every dinner, every occasion, everyone want to talk diet these days. Or maybe they've always wanted to talk diets. And I happen to know a lot about what happens on a general scale, but also on an individual scale. And my recommendations are the same. Eat real low carb food, cooked from the ground. Don't overdo it, and then skip meals. Try to go down to 2 meals or 1 meal a day. And change things. Don't stay on a certain idea. We're not built for that. We're built for metabolic flexibility, evolutionary, no doubt. All of us are. So that's a short recommendation. And I have to say, we are also very much diet agnostic in that sense. We have a device that sees if you have got into ketosis 10 minutes ago, period. That's what we say. But then, of course, people want to get educated and want to get advice, and then sometimes we do. But otherwise, we'll refer to you, Ivor, and you can give them advice, and then we can just talk about how the technology works. So I usually say, when I'm going to explain this to people that haven't heard of ketosis, and of course your listeners have. I mean, this is one of the greatest collection of low carb people around the world in your listening to this podcast and your YouTube channel. So anyway, but I'll explain it from my perspective as a physicist. So the first thing to differ, or the first myth to bust, is to say that there is a difference between nutrition, energy, and fuel. So nutrition is good food and includes macronutrients and micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and the macronutrients on top of that. That's what nutrition is, and we need that to think, to build new cells, to exercise, all of those things, and get energy. Energy is the pure energy. That's the core of what the cell, what's unique with life, and what's unique with the cell is that it produces, unlike Europe, I usually say, it can produce its own energy in the mitochondria. So in the mitochondria, you produce the energy. It's called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and ATP is needed to do everything, to contract the muscle cells, to produce neurotransmitters, to produce new cells. ATP is used for everything. It's the monetary kind of unit of energy in the cell. So ATP is the energy. And how do we get energy? Well, we need fuel, and there's 2 steps of fuel here. One fuel, there are only 2 types of fuel that can give ATP to a brain cell or a muscle cell, and that is either blood ketones, the beta hydroxybutyrate, let's call it BHB from now on, that's easy, or it's blood glucose. And then the BHB comes from fatty acids, split up triglycerides in your, and they're split up in the liver by the liver mitochondria. That's ketosis. We'll come back to that. And then, of course, the other part is, glucose comes from carbohydrates. Glucose comes from glucose. It can also come from the liver, but most of the time it comes from eating too much, or not too much, but eating white bread or things like that. You know that. So that's the background. So differ between fuel, energy, and then we'll just skip nutrition. I'm going to talk about proteins at all today, I think. So we're going to talk about fat and carbs and how that works in the system. And if you look at the fats, then, if everything is fine and the moon is in the right position and your insulin levels, of course, are low, and you're not insulin resistant, and in general, the body has come into a kind of conclusion, your brain has come to the conclusion that, right now it seems like these days, the last week or so, things have been kind of low on carbs. We always ate carbs, didn't we? And now we suddenly don't have carbs, the brain thinks. And then, it seems to be less food also because we're jumping meals here, and maybe we're even fasting a day or two. Great. And then it has 2 decisions. Either you can say, maybe this is just a short break. I don't want to sacrifice the fat I've stored over the years. And we're talking evolutionary now. So maybe you go into starvation. That is converting proteins, your own muscle cells, into proteins that converts into glucose. Or you go into ketosis. And then what happens when the ketosis starts is that the brain will tell through the blood your adipose cells to release triglycerides, fatty acids, and goes into the bloodstream. And when the bloodstream get high blood fats, your liver will kick in and saying, just like with high blood glucose, is saying, we got to do something about this, and that's the liver's job. So it starts breaking down the blood fats into ketone bodies. And those are three parts. One is BHB. That's the main part that drives the brain and the muscle cells almost as well as glucose, and in many ways better than glucose. And then you have a middle molecule. So every triglyceride is broken down into BHB, acetoacetate. And by the way, BHB is measured through blood sampling, just like blood glucose. We measure blood ketones through a prick in your finger. Acetoacetate you can measure with urine sticks. It's like a little chemical experiment you did in school, and then you get a very kind of vague type of value in terms of a color scheme, and measuring in your urine is also very dependent on your dilution of your urine. It will be very dependent on how much water you've been drinking and everything else that is in your urine. So it's a very imprecise method, but it will tell you something. And then the third molecule, which are kind of the fumes, the residue of the process, is acetone. Acetone is a free floating gas, a free radical that goes into the bloodstream from the liver, and then it's ventilated out through your lungs, because acetone is not used for anything. A little tiny fraction of the acetone is actually metabolized back to something, but most of it is just ventilated out. And the half-life of the ventilation is about 30 minutes in the bloodstream. So we'll see around what we say between, if you have a high value on Acetrack, a high value in parts per million that we measure in, we're the only one to do that too. Of acetone, it means you've burned fat and how much, or your liver has produced ketone bodies, I should say, 10 minutes to 1 hour ago. Mm-hmm. That's the long version of the entire metabolism of humans.
Yeah, that's perfect, Anders, and I don't even have to add to that. That's the core. So in essence, when you go into that fasted type state, or you've done some really healthy exercise, or you're eating really healthy, very low carb food, your body switches over towards the production of BHB and these other metabolites, which can be measured by the device, and it can tell you that in the last 10 minutes to an hour, you've moved into a zone of healthy ketosis. And that is not just fantastic to know and to plan your eating and how you live easily using the device, but it's also, I find, psychologically hugely beneficial in terms of forming good habits. So like with my Whoop device that measures heart rate, and it tells you when you've been bold or good yesterday and during your previous 24 hours, this one even more dynamically says when you're in an optimum metabolic state. And it encourages you, and it kind of is a hand on your shoulder, I find, guiding you towards optimum health. Whereas without measuring, as I always said, if you don't measure it, it don't get fixed. If you don't measure it, you can't understand it. Without measurement, you're left just kind of sleepwalking along and trying to eat healthy generally or do exercise. With this, it motivates you to keep on the right track. And that aspect I love about it.
Yeah, and that you're completely right about that. And that's so many people have we have thousands of users here in Sweden, and people in general think before they started using the device, they thought they were in ketosis in situations when they weren't, and opposite, when they're thinking, well, now I must have fallen out of it. Well, maybe you don't. So that, and it's very individual too. And also, when during 24 hours, if you're ever in ketosis, when is it as highest? Me personally, I always, and this tend to be generally the fact for middle-aged people and older, that if you were ever in ketosis, it's in the last few hours before you wake up in the early morning hours. And so the answer I get, what I've learned over the last few years, is that I can't eat anything after 9 o'clock, not even a handful of peanuts. I will be out the next morning. And there's so many things that will kick me out. If I have a bad night's sleep, I'm out. If I have stress, if I have cortisol levels, I'm out, it seems. So it has to be really, your body has to be in a calm, good state before everything, all the top hormones needs to kind of fade out. And then I usually say that when do you stock up on your shelves in your supermarket? It's not during rush hour. It's before you open. So either younger people tend to have, if they have high values in the evening before they go to bed, and other people have it in the morning. And most of the people doesn't have it high at all during the day. But you're kind of a little other take on that, Ivor, aren't you? Because you told me that you had low values in the morning and before lunch, and then in the afternoons you had like 70 or so.
Yeah, that was early readings, and I'll either show on the screen or I'll do a separate piece and intersperse it here on a few days of my values I put in. But the pattern is, well, I'm a little unusual in a couple of ways, so I'll just explain this very briefly. I tend to run a high-ish glucose. In other words, when you're eating less carbohydrate, your insulin goes down, your glucagon goes up, and it tells your liver to do gluconeogenesis. Because just as you described, your body's sensing we've got a shortage here of energy, and it begins to turn on glucose. That's the first pass. And genetically, or my physiology, I tend to do that very promptly, and I do it pretty well. And I also have another slight difference. I eat one meal a day, which is not overly common. So I eat around 6 p.m. once a day. So because I'm fasting 24 hours most days, that's a little different than the average person. So there are a couple of differences, maybe. And one last thing, Anders, which I think you'll like. I've told people for many years my secret hack. And my secret hack was because 10 years ago I learned all about ketosis, cholesterol, transport, lipoproteins, just everything. I was obsessed. I began to speak on it around the world, but I wasn't familiar with speaking in front of 500-600 people in an auditorium. My corporate career was always around 60 and it was work. So I was tense, it was a tense experience. And what I discovered instinctively or thought up was ketosis with my brain running on BHB is an alert, advanced state. And I think evolutionary, when you were 24 or 36 hours with no food, you needed to hunt successfully or you were screwed. So I think there's an element. That was my feeling. So I began to fast at least 24 hours before going on stage. And I'll have to say, look, it's subjective. It's not an RCT. Fine. It made the difference. I was alive on stage, a healthy tension. It was an extraordinary hack. And now I find out that I was right about the 24 plus instinctively, because now the machine is telling me clearly that's where I have to be to shoot up. And that's where I'm annoying to other people when I go post 24 hours because I'm on fire. So anyway, there you go.
That's, and in that sense, evolutionary, we're all the same in that sense. And this is actually what I find. I've slowly kind of increased my fasting window to becoming, not every day, but most of the days it's 18 hours rather. And then sometimes I go up to 20 hours and things like that. And I haven't actually used Acetrack right before dinner then, but because then it's dinner that I will focus on. But I should start doing that. But I do feel the last kind of half year, I feel much sharper the longer the fasting window gets. Maybe switching to one meal sometimes, but sometimes I eat two meals, but within 4 hours. So I eat one meal at 3 o'clock and then another at 7, and that's it. I can't tend to eat that much on one occasion any longer, also because I've been so desugarized and the carb that I just get full. I get a sense of fullness very quickly when eating, regardless of what I eat, actually. Anyway, the sharpness comes from that, and of course I'm glad to hear that the device actually shows you that, because that's a good example, Ivor, for everyone listening and maybe getting an Acetrack later on and start testing it. Is don't be so surprised that your values will go up all the time and down all the time during 24 hours, during a week, during a month even. It will be, you will be surprised, and that's how it works. It's not a small little machine that the liver is doing little ketosis all the time. It doesn't. It switches a lot. And add to that the fourth macronutrient, which some people call it alcohol, ethanol. So ethanol is also actually a fairly good kind of energy maker for your body. We're evolutionary built to also consume fermented food, and that gave us alcohol, and that's why we are the only mammal out there that can easily metabolize alcohol. Anyway, alcohol is on the first. It seems that as soon as you consume alcohol, the liver will go on and working with that. That's first priority. So there's a kind of working list for your liver, and it doesn't work on all the things at the same time. So first of all, if it's alcohol in the system, it will start working with that. Second, if it's fructose in the system, it will start working with that. And you know the all your listeners know the evil of fructose, of course, and what that makes, how it builds fatty liver and all of that. And then after that, you can go into, gluconeogenesis, and it has a lot of other things on its list, it seems. And then ketosis seems to be at the bottom of the list all the time on your to-do list for the day, and that's why it also happens to get to that during the night in many times. And if I could measure in the middle of the night, I haven't tested that, I think I would have highest values around like 5 o'clock in the morning, me personally. I guess I could do that experiment, but I like to sleep in the morning, so. I mean, you can't right now with the breath test that we already explained. You have to do a full exhalation for 6 seconds with the pressure between 10 and 20 centimeter water, over a certain time. You know it because you've been using it, so it's not that easy to just capture while you're sleeping. But eventually, in a future, maybe we can capture it in tidal breath. Who knows? Anyway,
Yeah, actually,
I just agree with you. It's keep using this type of device will give you those answers that you can't get, not even with blood sampling. I have to say a little bit about that too. If you measure blood ketones, that will give you the mean value of if you have blood ketones over the last kind of 24 hours, but it will also tell you, it will not tell you whether or not you have consumed that. So when I do this analogy of a hybrid car, then I usually say that the ketosis is the electric part because it's most sustainable for your body. And then measuring acetone, measuring breath ketones is like checking if you have plugged in the cord in the wall and charging the battery. While measuring blood ketones is just seeing how much charge you have in your battery. It could be 50%. It doesn't tell you anything. It means that, at some point you produce blood ketones, absolutely. But it doesn't say how much, and it didn't say when, and it didn't say how much you used up.
Yeah, and it has utility, absolutely, but exactly as it described, I love the analogy. It's not a dynamic, real world, real life, in the moment measurement, which engineers love.
Yeah.
It's basically you want to see how I used to give an analogy for a different thing was the weakness of using fasting insulin, fasting blood glucose. And my analogy was the jet engine. So you've got a jet engine and you want to see how it performs under load and vibration characteristics, let's say. But it's idling on the runway and you put on all your sensors. The metabolic machinery is running on idle when you get fasted blood measurements. What do you need to do? You need to measure those measurements when it's running. Like the jet engine, you'd run it high and then get the measurements. And that's where the post-glucose, OGTT insulin measurements and 2-hour insulins and all are so crucial. But that's all blood. And you know what occurred to me as you're talking, Anders? The other thing about this is, versus the blood measurement, is everything you said. But the blood measurement, I know it's relatively simple, like pinpricking. But for me as a busy person, it's a different world than blowing into this with my phone for 5 or 6 seconds. I mean, it's just completely different. I remember my blood tester, and I rarely use it. You unzip it, you take out your pin prickers, and you get out your sticks, and pin pricking and sticks, and then eventually it goes through its cycle, and you... Come on. This is more accurate. It's dynamic. It's immediate. It reflects your last half hour. It's the actual metabolizing of the energy substrate that tells you what's going on. And it's just super easy. That's huge for me.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think this is just a beginning. I mean, hope that other companies will tag along and also start measuring more things, or we will do it. But it's surprising that we have so little tools to understand our own health or in general. I mean, that's that's sad, 2023, that we are at that state. We know more about how things are going with banks around the world, or we know more about how we can meet new people and date, and we can track everywhere we are, and we know so much things. And in industry, they know everything. We know the industry knows more about how a car is behaving than human body, and then the doctors are. So we have completely invested in other than in blood sampling, in non-invasive biomarkers methods. But the other things to look into, and on universities they're doing it, but the industry, the medtech industry, I worked with Siemens and Philips and GE and Medtronic, and I know the medtech industry. They're not interested in consumer health for some strange reason. But there's so much to do with sweat and with saliva, and then many other things that we can start picking up things in, and we're not.
Yeah, I think it's all about commercial realities, and you would think that this would be something they'd explode into, but again, there's a slight all over the world, particularly in Ireland. In Ireland, I know companies that are working, giving low carb and kind of keto style diets to corporates, and it's a kind of health app and all this stuff. And they admitted to me we can't use the words low carb or especially keto in Ireland, because all our allegiance are working with the Diabetes Society on doing human trials, putting diabetes in remission. We have to just say real food. Because if you say low carb or keto, it sounds conspiratorial, but this is the way the world is. If you say low carb or keto, suddenly a lot of people shrink back because of the propaganda against it. So there might be some of that in there.
It might be. No, I wish that the same in Sweden, and I hate to be a conspiratorial. I'm not, and I know you're not either. But sometimes, as you say, on all the things you've been doing, you follow the data. We follow data too, and we try to give new tools that hasn't really existed on the world market, and then you get kind of. I think that generally the grassroots movement out there is great. I think they understand it. It's the establishment, particularly the established healthcare industry, but also this kind of established tech industry have for some reason are really scared of going into any kind of health claim connected to any kind of life. Diversify has this controversial idea that lifestyle diseases are best treated with lifestyle changes. And how is that controversial? But it is. And I guess you see the same all the time.
Yeah, I think it's mainly the keto or low carb. They're okay with getting into heart rate and all the stuff that's pretty established or conservative. But they don't like getting into things where there's been some noises questioning them. And I know the whole keto and potentially benefiting cancer has become extremely fraught. The cancer industry got very angry about that. We saw a lot of that in Ireland, astonishing kind of stuff going on. So I always say it's not a conspiracy theory. It's just capitalism and business interests will flex their muscle.
Yeah.
And we know the banks in Washington, it's accepted and published in the mainstream that the banks lobbying in Washington are the biggest lobbyer, pharmaceuticals close behind. They literally have whole streets full of lobbyists, and it's not a secret, it's not a conspiracy. Industry is smart, aggressive, and has to increase the quarterly revenues. So it's just business. That's what I always tell. It's just business.
It's business, and add in pharma industry, but also the food industry. I mean, the food subsidies and having all this ultra processed food that is given to us through the Western world, at least. It's but then again, the problem with obesity. I mean, what I get mad about as a physicist is that they are not looking at the data, because the data look at incidence and look at prevalence of diabetes type 2 or obesity. That's it. That should be enough. There's no other potentially deadly disease that grows, 7% per year globally. There's no other. It's not even close. I worked 21 years in cancer, and it's pretty steady. Steady actually goes in the right direction because you get early detection and a better treatments and things like that. But in terms of metabolic syndrome kind of diseases, explodes around the world. And so I'm going to advocate for it. I just get mad at saying that, well, you are a doctor, you look at the numbers. And people are saying, oh, I suddenly suffer from diabetes type 2. That's nothing you suffer from. It's something you mainly did to yourself. And if you get the right advice, you can even revert it. So, but again, that's controversial to say. I know that.
Well, there you are. And even
But
though
I'm
we
not a
have,
doctor, I'm a physicist, and I look at it actually from the numbers, and I look at incidence. What are people dying from prematurely? And people are not, they're still dying of cardiovascular disease, but where is that coming from? And where are all the numbers coming from? And then it kind of boils down that the biggest premature killer right now are metabolic driven.
absolutely. And you know what? I've been sharing for so many years, like things like EuroAspire study, an enormous study in 2015. It went across 24 countries of Europe. So as an engineer, it covered all the different slight genetic differences, right? So they covered
Yeah.
that. And they measured the glucose under OGTT, fasting glucose, and a few 1 hour measurements, a lot of glucose measuring. But they looked at all of the cardiac patients from ages 18 to 80, right? 24 countries. And they
Wow.
took a random sample of cardiac issue people. So they did the perfect engineering poll of the biggest problem in the universe, the health universe, cardiovascular disease. And they looked at glucose to see, well, how many of them have a glucose problem? And what they found out was a third of them from that poll on their record were already type 2 diabetic, full blown. And they looked at the glucose they pulled, and another quarter were actual full blown diabetic type 2 undiagnosed. So now they're up to over half of all patients, all ages, all countries. But it gets better. They identified another full quarter or a little more who were what they called high risk for type 2 diabetes. Now, they were clearly type 2 diabetic, it's just they didn't reach the threshold. So, in the end, around 75% of all ages, all countries, heart disease problem people were essentially type 2 diabetic. 75%. And they didn't measure insulin. And myself and Dr. Gerber and many others never stop saying you can't identify type 2 diabetes properly without measuring insulin. It's an insulin disease, not a glucose. Glucose just listens to the orders. So the funny thing is, it's probably 80 plus, and the results in America, I won't go on. Like you say, enormous crippling diseases, death and misery and financial destruction. And the answers are quite simple, but industry can't profit from real food. That's a problem.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the problem.
You know, I know you wanted to keep this, or we both running around as always, busy engineering types, but we might finish up with just a quick riff on the future potential you mentioned once or twice, the future molecules and relation to health, and then we'll wrap it up with that.
Yeah, so let me show you our printed circuit board. I have to do that. So this one, actually, the orange one over there is an acetone sensor. So as I said earlier, we've invested in this breath analysis platform, both in software and data analysis, but also in hardware. And the thing is, those are all sunk costs, and we can just put in more sensors or other sensors onto the board. And the first product that we are building right now, the next product we're building right now, we're building a prototype that will be shown later this year. We will detect methane and hydrogen in your breath in parts per million as well. And if you have that, that it will initially be actually for a Swedish healthcare chain here called FunMed in Sweden, which are working with functional medicine. And they have Europe's largest cohort of diagnosed patients with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And in short, that means that you have your microbiome should be should not be in your small intestine, but they have been overgrowing in the large intestine and then migrating into the small intestine. And when they are there and start eating glucose, they will produce methane and hydrogen, and also a third gas, actually, which we can look at later. But those two are actually markers for SIBO, and they will have a half-life that is really short, like minutes. So it cannot be detected in blood sampling. So today there is a very tedious procedure where you capture breath after you're drinking a provocateur. You measure every 20 minutes, and then you capture that in small tubes, and then you send it to America to a gas chromatograph, and you get it analyzed, and wait a month, and you pay $300. And then maybe it didn't work, and you have to redo it again. To build a home monitoring device to see if you have, and to what degree you have SIBO, that is the first step. But But once you start looking at hydrogen and methane, that relates also to IBS. It relates to Crohn's disease. It relates to lactose intolerance even. So to just in general have a tool at home that can look at your diet disorders or your gas belly kind of things. I'm a physicist, a lot of disclaimers here. I'm not saying we can solve all of those, but we can at least look at it. And once we build the tool, I'm sure there will be lots of studies that we can conduct around the world to try to get a non-invasive tool to see the degree of gastric disorder you have.
Yeah, and you know, Anders, that's close to my heart because, and we talked in our previous discussion, we can bring in a physician, one of the best in the world, a cardiologist, Dr. William Davis, MD, the Wheat Belly author, a good friend of mine, and we did a couple of podcasts a year or two ago, and he's naturally moved from cholesterol and low carb and vitamin D importance and keto, and he's moved all the way through, but he's always been somewhat of a leader, a very self-determined man. And he's pushed into, naturally, from his discoveries from his patients, SIBO as a massive epidemic. And what he's identified, interestingly, is he began to see many, a minority, but many patients who went low carb, did the right stuff, magnesium, vitamin D, healthy sun, did it all. Their A1Cs came down, they reversed their diabetes or remissioned it, and everything was good, they lost weight. But quite a sizable minority got weight loss plateaus or had persistent issues. So they got way better, but there was something that was sticky. And he has come to the conclusion from all his work that the sticky thing is the SIBO type, small intestine bacterial distribution, that even when you fix the diet, you don't actually automatically fix that. And that's where he's intervening with a few key species of microbiome. He's actually doing it through a yogurt, you know, trillions of bugs per pot. And he's treating people by kind of inoculating their biome with the really good ones. He's research going back through native tribes to find what he would pick as the best ones. And he's seeing amazing results in his early trials, that after 3 weeks of staying really good on diet and measuring the hydrogen, he's getting the switch from quick hydrogen through to much longer or no hydrogen with this inoculation of these good bacteria. So I think this is a huge story yet to come.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Ivor. So interesting and really to collaborate, because we are doing it with some companies here in Sweden too in food tech. Yes, also looking at functional foods and you know, a number of good companies out there that are trying to move the needle on this. And you know, if you have one of the world leaders on that, I would be love to talk to him and see what we can do.
Let's do it, Anders. Okay,
yes.
It's a wrap. Great stuff. And yeah, I'll put links down below to Acetrack, my new best friend. I am an engineer and I'm an enthusiast, but yeah, believe me, this is a groundbreaker. And yeah, we'll leave it at that, but we'll circle back to talk more about this, about keto, about hydrogen, about many things in the near term.
I would love to. Great. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Anders.
Bye-bye.
Martin the Engineer is great. In any case, Anders has given me a discount for any followers who are interested in this technology. We've discussed it there at length. I'm a convert. I love my Acetrack, and that's not a hard sell. It's just I love the technology, and I think it's got huge scope in the future, as we discussed. So 20% discount using Emperor 20. And I'll put all the links down below if you wish to avail of this excellent offer. It's new technology. It's been working fantastic for me, and I really love the company. And my much longer conversation with Anders and his team a couple of weeks ago, we went through a lot of details, and I asked them a lot of questions around the technology, their whole system, and went into great detail. So I can stand over it. I'm delighted with it. I'll be using it daily as I use my Whoop device to keep me on track, and hope you can avail also if you wish, only if you wish, no hard sell, but there's a 20% discount there. It's a long-term battery. I haven't charged it in a couple of weeks and it just keeps going. That's another great feature about it. Highly robust. and it's got that crucial pressure sensor, which through their advanced algorithm is what really magically gives the accurate, reproducible and repeatable acetone/BHB metrics with which you can track your health and keep yourself on track. So thank you. All the links below if you wish to avail.